I'm calling you because we have some bad news about your wife and your daughter.
Yeah.
We responded to the house, and that they're deceased.
Yeah.
Do you know that?
I did.
On a cold winter morning in January 2006, a quiet home in Massachusetts was about to experience a tragedy no one saw coming. Inside, a mother and her young daughter were found lifeless in their bed, their deaths leaving everyone in shock. What seemed like a normal day for this family quickly turned into a mystery that no one could explain. As the investigation started, it became clear that there was much more to this story than anyone first thought. Who was behind this horrifying act? And what really happened that day? The truth would leave everyone stunned, especially those who knew the family best. The case of the Entwistle family. Rachel Elizabeth Souza was born on December 14, 1978, in Massachusetts, to Priscilla and Paul Souza. From a young age, Rachel was known for her joyful nature and close bond with her family. Although her parents eventually parted ways and started new families, Rachel maintained a warm and harmonious relationship with both of them. Surrounded by love and support throughout her childhood and adolescence, Rachel's optimistic view of life was reflected in the choices she made and the way she approached challenges. As she neared the end of high school, Rachel was ready to pursue her next big dream, studying abroad. With the full support of her parents, she set her sights on England, eager to explore new cultures, make friends, and broaden her horizons. Her warm personality and infectious smile made the transition to a new country smooth and exciting. Once settled and enrolled at a local university, Rachel embraced every opportunity to discover something new. It was during a boat ride on the river that her life took an unexpected turn. In what seemed like a scene from a romantic movie, Rachel locked eyes with a young man also enjoying a quiet afternoon on the water. This casual encounter marked the beginning of a special connection between the two. The young man named Neil was born on September 18, 1978, and grew up in a small town in the heart of England. He was the son of Clifford, a coal miner, and Iben, a school cook. His family was completed by his younger brother, Russell. Neil, determined to make the most of his opportunities, attended the University of York, where he earned a master's degree in electronic engineering. From the moment they met, Rachel and Neil felt an undeniable bond, and their relationship quickly flourished. After a period of dating, they decided to marry in a beautiful and emotional ceremony in the summer of 2003, held in Rachel's hometown. The couple then settled in England, where a few years later they joyfully welcomed their first daughter, Lillian, born on April 9, 2005. Neil couldn't contain his excitement when Lillian was born. He eagerly called his parents to share the joyful news. According to the couple's later account, they could hear the pride and happiness in Neil's voice as he spoke. They were overjoyed to become grandparents, and at 8:04 in the morning they were already at the local baby store, eagerly waiting to buy clothes for their new granddaughter. Neil's mother, delighted by the novelty of shopping for a girl after having two sons, ended up buying 5 tiny dresses, all in beautiful shades of pink. Lillian quickly became the apple of their eyes. Rachel was equally overjoyed by the arrival of her daughter, though it meant giving up her job as a teacher of English, drama, and theater studies at a local high school to focus entirely on Lillian. Neil, on the other hand, took on the responsibility of supporting their growing family. Everything seemed to be falling into place until, 3 months later, Neil announced to his parents that the family would be moving to the United States. The news was difficult for his parents to hear. While they understood their son's reasons, they were saddened by the thought of not being able to watch their granddaughter grow up. Nevertheless, they threw a farewell party and hoped that, one day, Neil, Rachel, and Lillian would return to England. At the party, Lillian happily babbled in her crib, wearing one of the pink dresses her grandmother had bought. Once they arrived in the United States, the young family stayed with Rachel's mother, Priscilla, and her husband Joseph in Massachusetts as they searched for a place of their own. While Neil worked in IT, Rachel continued to care for Lillian, adjusting to their new life across the ocean. By the end of December that year, the young couple decided to move into a beautiful and expensive rental house located to the east of Boston. Once the deal was finalized during the first week of January 2006, Rachel, Neil, and Lillian settled into their new home, and their future appeared bright and full of promise. To celebrate, they invited a mutual friend to dinner at their house on Saturday, January 21st. However, when the friend arrived that evening and knocked on the door, there was no answer. She called their phones, but neither picked up. It was winter, and the cold was unbearable, but she had no choice but to wait. Given the recent arrival of Rachel and Neil's first child, the friend assumed they might have had an unexpected situation that disrupted their plans. After some time, she contacted Priscilla, only to find that she also hadn't heard from her daughter, which was even more unusual. The friend, now growing anxious, believed that there was no way Rachel would have forgotten or made her wait for such a long time. Desperate, she called the police to request a welfare check on the family. Officers responded to the request and conducted a superficial inspection of the house, but found nothing out of the ordinary. According to the local police sergeant, the exterior of the home appeared normal. As the hours passed, however, Priscilla and her husband were consumed by panic. Rachel had always been extremely close to her mother, and after Lillian was born, that bond had only grown stronger, as Rachel often turned to her mom for help with parenting. Determined to find their daughter's family, Priscilla and her husband Joseph contacted local hospitals, reached out to all their relatives and friends, and maintained constant communication with the police. However, as the hours passed, the situation remained unchanged. By the night of Sunday, January 22nd, the police returned to the house. This time, they entered through the garage, which was empty of vehicles. Once inside, they noticed the family dog locked in a cage amidst many boxes still unpacked from the recent move. As they ascended to the second floor, the officers encountered a grim scene. Hidden under a pile of bedding in the master bedroom were the lifeless bodies of 27-year-old Rachel and her 9-month-old daughter, Lillian. However, there was no sign of Neil in the house. The police had the difficult task of informing Priscilla and Joseph about the tragedy. As expected, they were devastated, unable to comprehend that something so horrific could happen to them. As the investigation into the family's movements proceeded, authorities discovered that the last time they had been seen together was Thursday afternoon, recorded by security cameras at a local shopping center. The main focus of the investigation now turned to finding Neil. The only lead the police had was the license plate of his car. So, since he was from England, the detectives considered the possibility that he might have returned there. They contacted airport authorities and their suspicions were confirmed. After reviewing the parking lot footage, it showed Neil's car entering the lot on the night of Friday, January 20th. This information led the police to uncover that Neil had flown to London on the morning of Saturday, January 21st. On Monday, January 23rd, the police called Neil's parents in England, and after a 2-hour phone conversation, which was recorded, Neil explained that he had left the house on the morning of Friday, January 20th, around 9 a.m. to run an errand, leaving Rachel and Lillian asleep and safe in the master bedroom. When he returned about 2 hours later, he found both of them already lifeless, likely as a result of gunshot wounds. He had no idea who was responsible and, in a panic, his first instinct was to cover their bodies with a blanket. He then attempted to take his own life with a knife, but was unsuccessful. Desperate, he drove the family car to his in-laws' house, knowing Joseph had a gun and intending to use it to end his life. However, when he arrived and found the house locked, he had no other option but to fly back to England to be with his parents and put some distance between himself and the nightmare. Meanwhile, Neil's parents had no idea what had happened until their son unexpectedly showed up at their doorstep. The words Neil spoke were enough to shatter them, and his mother collapsed to the ground, on her knees, tears streaming from her eyes. She couldn't breathe or speak. It was as if the world had stopped, and from that moment on, she was transported into a reality far darker than she had ever known. Following their request, Neil later contacted his in-laws in Massachusetts to express his deep sorrow. The account he gave of the events matched the one he had shared during his conversation with the police officer. Meanwhile, the autopsy results revealed that Rachel had died from a gunshot wound to the head and Lillian from a gunshot wound to the torso. The bullet that struck Lillian had also pierced her mother's left chest. By then, due to his hasty departure from the crime scene and the complicated nature of his story, Neil had already become a person of interest to the authorities. As a result, detectives began to delve deeper into the couple's private lives, tracking their online activity. They soon discovered that behind the facade of the perfect husband, Neil had been living a double life that his wife and close friends knew nothing about. Thanks to his computer skills, he had managed to make money on the darker side of the internet. One expert who worked on uncovering this hidden life revealed some of his findings. Through the investigation, it was discovered that Neil had been selling goods and services that he never delivered, infuriating many people who felt scammed. And because he often used Rachel's email address, she soon began receiving numerous threatening emails, demanding refunds from those who had been cheated. Additionally, the theory that the attacker had been an angry stranger conflicted with the fact that there were no signs of forced entry at the home, and the victims were a mother and her young daughter, not a perpetrator involved in any fraud. Further investigation revealed that Neil had accumulated between $40,000 and $50,000 in debt over several years in the UK, and had added more debt during his 6 months in the United States. This was especially surprising considering the lifestyle he had been leading recently, as described by a family friend. From the detective's perspective, Neil's situation was incredibly complicated. However, none of their findings conclusively pointed to him as the perpetrator of the crimes, and they were at a standstill. Refusing to give up, they continued to search for the evidence they needed. They decided to analyze Joseph's firearm, and despite Neil claiming that he had only used it once months earlier at a shooting range with his father-in-law, the results revealed his DNA on the handle. Additionally, there was genetic material matching Rachel's on the weapon's trigger. Finally, The detectives found a set of keys to Joseph and Priscilla's house in Neil's car, which he had left at Boston's International Airport. These new discoveries, all pointing to Neil as the sole suspect, led to an international arrest warrant being issued. Meanwhile, Rachel and Lillian were buried in Massachusetts after a deeply emotional ceremony. They were laid to rest in a single casket, and their gravestones bore the surname Souza. Both their birth and death certificates were altered so that Neil's name did not appear on them. A week later, Neil was arrested while sitting in a London subway car. He did not resist. Although Neil initially requested not to be sent back to the United States, he later changed his mind and agreed to be extradited. Outside the courthouse, his attorney stated that his client intended to cooperate fully with the authorities, particularly because he did not want to cause further suffering to his late wife's family or to himself. Back in the United States, Neil was ordered to remain in prison without bail. He was charged with 2 counts of murder, illegal possession of a firearm, and illegal possession of ammunition. Neil pleaded not guilty to all charges, and shortly after, the district attorney held a press conference to explain to the public what they believed had happened. At some point on the morning of Friday, January 20th, Neil, most likely using his father-in-law's weapon, ended the lives of Rachel and Lillian, who had been lying in bed next to her mother. The prosecutor also mentioned that, while they could not confirm it, they had reason to believe that Neil's original plan had also included taking his own life, though that did not come to pass. Finally, the prosecutor stated that after the murders, Neil returned the weapon to his father-in-law's house and made arrangements to leave the country. In December 2006, nearly a year after the crime, while Neil was in pre-trial detention awaiting his trial, officers discovered letters in which he expressed feelings of depression to his parents and legal team, suggesting that he might be contemplating ending his life. As a result, he was transferred to a hospital for a mental health evaluation. A forensic psychiatrist determined that Neil exhibited symptoms of Asperger's syndrome, which the specialist suggested could explain some aspects of his behavior. It wasn't until mid-2008, after numerous delays, that the court began selecting jurors. The defense raised concerns about the fairness of the trial, citing the widespread media coverage of the case. Reports indicated that some potential jurors had already formed opinions about Neil's guilt before the trial even began, presenting an additional challenge for the defense in ensuring an impartial jury. Despite these concerns, Neil's trial in Massachusetts began shortly afterward. While his defense team fought to exclude DNA evidence and other materials obtained without a warrant, the court rejected these attempts. Neil chose not to testify in his own defense and did not call any witnesses, while the prosecution presented a strong case. Throughout the trial, Neil's parents were forced to listen to a disturbing narrative in which the prosecution portrayed him as a cold-blooded man, manipulative and deeply in debt, willing to eliminate his family to escape a life he could no longer maintain, then fleeing the crime scene to avoid justice. As expected, this experience was devastating for them. They were also mourning the loss of their only granddaughter. To make matters worse, the prosecution introduced further evidence of Neil's alleged obsession with sex, adult websites, and his shady activities online, painting a picture of a self-absorbed psychopath who sought to escape a life spiraling out of control. However, one of the most heartbreaking moments for the jury was when the prosecution presented the stained clothing that little Lillian had been wearing when she lost her life. The visual evidence of the tragedy deeply affected everyone following the trial, and images of Rachel and Lillian's bodies together in bed were shown as a key piece of evidence. While Neil remained calm for most of the trial, one particular moment caused widespread outrage and controversy among the large public following the case on television. During the showing of a video of his wife and daughter's lifeless bodies curled together in bed, Neal appeared to break down and covered his face with his hands. However, some observers pointed out that his reaction, far from being one of remorse, seemed more like a nervous laugh disguised as tears, which fueled public perceptions of his coldness and lack of genuine emotion. On June 25, 2008, Neal was found guilty of the murders of Rachel and Lillian Souza. As he listened to the verdict, he closed his eyes, almost as if he couldn't believe the decision of the court. Outside the courthouse, his mother surprised everyone with her comments to the press saying she believed her son was innocent. Despite what she chose to believe, Neal was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, the mandatory penalty in Massachusetts for crimes of this nature. The judge made it clear that the sentence could only be altered by a pardon from the governor or a successful appeal. Additionally, Neal was prohibited from profiting from the sale of his story. After being transferred to prison, Neal's legal team automatically appealed to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. As his previous attorney was facing serious health issues, Neal hired another lawyer who argued that the search of the family home was conducted without a warrant and that, as a result, the evidence obtained should have been excluded during the trial. While the appeal was under review, Neal suffered a severe incident in prison. He was tricked into shaving his head in an attempt to gain protection from a white supremacist gang. Instead, the gang threatened him with harm, and as a result, authorities placed him in protective custody. In December 2008, he was transferred to a medium-security prison for his safety, as his life was considered at risk. Around the same time, his parents broke their silence regarding their son's conviction, giving an interview to a British media outlet about aspects of the story they had not previously revealed. For them, the idea that the son they adored could be capable of such a heinous act was impossible to accept. For this reason, it was no surprise that they focused on how devastated Neal appeared when he returned home and told them what had happened. But as they themselves admitted, it never occurred to them to ask what he thought had really happened. In the months following their son's conviction, the couple reviewed dozens of documents, always with the belief that there was evidence that could exonerate him. They learned that Massachusetts had the second highest rate of wrongful convictions in the United States. However, regardless of what the truth may have been, both not only felt sorrow for Neal, but more importantly, for their first and only granddaughter. No one or nothing could ever replace her in their hearts. Neal's appeal was rejected 4 years later, and the following year, the United States Supreme Court refused to hear the case. Therefore, he had exhausted all of his options and would have to serve the original sentence. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.